Dr. Bremmer loves tough questions. Will economic cooperation with Iran ever be possible, even without nuclear development? Who's in charge? How are the power centers shifting? Who makes the rules?
Well, will economic cooperation be possible with Iran? Well, I mean, if you're China. I mean, they haven't signed those memoranda of understanding yet, but Azerbaijan, they look pretty close. So, I mean, it's certainly possible. Look, there are two reasons that you don't, if you're thinking about investing in Iran, there are two reasons you don't invest, right? Two things that might stop you. One, sanction environment. Two, the fact that Iran might fall apart or is a really hard place to do business. Both of those are becoming more problematic. I mean, the U.S. has a tough sanctions regime on Iran right now, so tough that the Iranian government in the last couple of weeks have had to start reducing, seriously reducing, their own internal subsidies. And it's led to some panic buying. It's led to some hoarding, because they haven't coordinated it well. But, you know, you also have the fact that within the Iranian government, the moderate conservatives and the Islamic nationalists are increasingly fighting, and fighting publicly. I mean, when the president of Iran refuses to implement an edict by the Guardians Council that says that the Tehran metro system, $2 billion, should be run by the moderate conservative Tehran City Council, and the supreme leader does not step in to intervene, I've never seen that happen before. There's a real fight developing within Iran. And over the medium term, 2, 3, 4 years, this is going to be one of the biggest issues. Because we know the Iranians are going to go nuclear. They may not test. We know they're going to go nuclear. And we know the Americans are leaving Iraq. And once they go nuclear, and people kind of deal with it, then the Gulf states are going to say, we've got to start working with these guys. What will stop them from starting to work with these guys is if the government looks like it's increasingly on a precipice. And so I do think that the level of risk on Iran is sustainable there. Eventually, do you work with Iran? Sure, because when that government falls, and you know this better than a lot of people, Bill, we're going to have an enormous amount of folks that are well-educated, pro-globalization, all the rest, coming up, businessmen and the rest, both in Iran and also Iranian diaspora members streaming back into that country. A lot of people going to do business there. Right now, though, the biggest and most exciting investment story in the Middle East is, of course, Iraq. A lot of you guys know that better than most Americans. And frankly, that's a very interesting story.
This may have to be the last question, so we can get you to the books, but the one country that may challenge your paradigm, India, largest democracy, deepening market economy, how does it factor into your scenario planning?
Well, you know, India is the world's largest democracy. It's also incredibly decentralized. So the ability for the Indian government to actually take over sectors is very limited. They're just not efficient enough or have enough control to actually make that happen. Now, there are big problems in India that have to do with the state. Massive corruption at local levels with the bureaucracy, inability to implement on things like public-private partnerships with infrastructure. But India is clearly moving in a direction of greater transparency and a greater market. It's just happening very slowly. So you look at a place like Gujarat. When Ratan Tata wanted to start the Nano, he went to West Bengal. He's lionized throughout India as an entrepreneur, but he couldn't get the local West Bengal farmers to allow him to create a headquarters for nano production. But then he went to Gujarat, and within months, he was basically up and running with all his licensing. Why? Because there's actually been improvement in transparency, and there's been much more consolidation of local politics, and there's been a real fight against corruption in that state. And there are other places in India that that's true. It's just happening slowly. So it's not that India is not a good story. It's not that India is not a story that's moving more towards a direction that the private sector will be able to invest. It's just happening from a very, very low base. I mean, Obama just left India, and it was a great visit for him, and lots of things that they want to do together, but the Indian economy is a quarter of the size of China's, and their per capita income is just over $1,000, compared to China nearing $5,000. So India is a story that's going to get much more exciting. The Economist just ran this cover that said India's growth is going to outstrip China's over the next 20 years. Yeah, per capita. But India's only just starting to become a major global force. And in 10 years, they're still going to be catching up. And so as a consequence, it's very, very early days for what long-term will be a very exciting story.
Maybe one last question, combining a couple of these with your indulgence. To what extent do you think that sovereign wealth funds, as well as resource control, will be used to push political agendas as state capitalism continues to grow and flourish? For example, the Chinese issue on precious earth to Japan, but as well as sovereign wealth funds.
Well, I mean, the Chinese, of course, say that they only use their sovereign wealth funds for economic purposes, not for political purposes. So, I mean, the fact that they gave, I think it was a $200 million grant to Costa Rica in exchange for Costa Rica switching their view on recognizing Taiwan was obviously purely an economic decision. Not sure where the upside economically was there. I mean, clearly these things are politicized. Clearly they'd be politicized if the United States had such mechanisms, and occasionally the U.S. does. That's not going to change. It's just becoming larger. And I fully expect, now the rare earths issue is a very interesting one, but it's a short-term one. I mean, the Chinese have something like 97% of production right now, but they only have a third of actual reserves of rare earths. And so they are making hay while the sun shines, because when the United States and the Australians and others start ramping up production, they will no longer have this kind of leverage. So since they have the leverage now, they want to maximize what they get out of it in terms of market access, technology, and the rest. Smart strategy for China. But if the Chinese are doing that with rare earths today, what are they going to be doing in other sectors over the longer term? They're going to be using it, and they're going to be using it to squeeze competitors and to get farther into markets. And that's going to be a growing challenge for Western firms in lots and lots of sectors. So it really is a different world.
Dr. Ian Bremmer, thank you so much.